Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here after some years of collaboration. So I am very grateful. Thank you for inviting me and to come to hear my talk today. So this talk is going to be a bit about like my research, but it's also part of the story or the road that we had to take to finally and hopefully make an impact on conservation and private lands in Chile. So first of all, currently after 8 years of working, the team is pretty big, and of course I wouldn't be able to do anything that I'm going to show you today if it wouldn't be for my colleagues that have been helping me and people at my lab in the last time. So, you know, we call, or some call this area the Anthropocene because the changes that we have made as human beings on our planets are very prominent. So, and it's important to know that, you know, the magnitude of the processes linked to the human activity are much important and stronger than even biogeochemical processes, which is quite important for us as an ecosystem ecologist and human beings in general. We move huge amounts of nitrogen, for example, in our systems, nitrogen that was not available years ago. The temporal dimension of the changes are very fast, and that's the main thing to climate change, for example. We know that the planet has gone climate changes in the past, but it has never been as fast as the ones that we have seen here, like the last 100 years with 1 degree Celsius of increment on the temperature. And also the spatial dimension of our impact is huge. And in this context, I wanted to show you this image. I don't know how many of you currently work with these measurements, but this is the net primary productivity of our planet during July of this year, which basically means where the green flora of our planet is, where the green is located. And where the green is located means a lot. It means how it influences the carbon storage, how it influences the climate, the water availability, several things that are really impacting globally. And this primary productivity is concentrated in several places, as we see here, with you know, patterns that are associated to biogeographical and climate patterns, but we manage 40% of that primary productivity. So we manage 40% of the plants that are really having an impact on the variables that I just mentioned. And partly of it, most of it, is related with agriculture. Therefore, the decisions that we take around agriculture are very important, not only for food security, but also for the planet itself. So many of you may be aware and would know that we, of course, receive goods and services every day from our planet. Pollination, you know, 3/4 of the food that we eat is a pollination agent. Water purification, so many cities receive until today their water by watersheds that are in good condition around. Or there's a lot of cultural patrimony associated with biodiversity or ecosystems in general. However, the speed and scale of degradation of these ecosystems are diminishing their ability to provide us those services or benefits. And in the context of climate change, this is even more important because that will reduce our capacity of adapting to climate change. So ecosystem services is a concept that we use quite often in ecology and also in conservation, and more recently in social sciences too. And there has been a big discussion about if we should be calling them ecosystem services or benefits by nature, for example, like IPBES has been, suggesting. But I wanted to put here the definition because these are processes and these are ecosystem functions. So we will receive a benefit when the ecosystems are working properly, when they have certain complexity and certain characteristics. If the ecosystems are degraded, there are no processes working there correctly or normally, therefore we don't receive the benefits. So I think it's a powerful concept also from point of view of what it means, you know, when you think that it's really something that is functioning. How needs that structure to be, or ecosystem be in a good condition to function? And this is a famous case that most of you may know, so I'm going to go through it very easily, fast, sorry, because this was one of the cases that made ecosystem services like a, you know, really a famous story of success, maybe, because New York City have received for hundreds of years, you know, the water that came from their healthy watershed. Until the nearly year 96, they had to face this problem that the water quality was really changing and decreasing in terms of quality. So they had to choose between these two options. And fortunately, they decided for this second option. And this second option, so restoring the watershed, was a suggestion that a group of scientists made. And we have to be honest that not all the time politics take into account scientific opinion, or our research turns out to be something that gets implemented. So New York City launched this revolutionary project basically to protect the watershed and to have back the quality that they used to have. There's in this website, you can find a lot more information about this case. We know, and there are several papers showing that there are economic costs associated with the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services. This is one way of valuing, of course, and it's not the only one. But for example, the annual market of pollination-dependent crops has that huge amount of money that I can not even really try to understand. And we have several species that make pollination, not only bees that we are also so worried about. There are several species besides that. And there is these other calculations, for example, of how much does the work that this Caribbean beetle makes for this kind of industry. It doesn't look very nice here, no? But we know that this is where many of the meat comes. And so in these two cases, you see that these are examples of species making processes that are so important for humans that they are, you know, they have these values associated. So the big question has always been, you know, how can we sustain the production, for example, but as minimizing the associated environmental impacts that production in general has. And of course, we need to promote ecosystem services and biodiversity, and that is very nice when we see it on paper, but it's quite difficult. Over the past 50 years, and many of you may know, but I really like this, this approach by Georgina Mace, there have been several prevailing views of how to make conservation. And it goes like from nature for itself, with species focus, until the people and nature, which is a more ecosystem-based and socio-ecological approach. And all of them are together until you see none of those visions exclude the other. And it's really good that we also have, you know, this last people and nature approach. But this also means that there are huge challenges, both by the methods and also the implementation of this view. So on paper, we all agree that it's very important. And those challenges are associated that, of course, we need integrative view of the problems and an interdisciplinary co-production of science that we know that it's interesting, but sometimes it's very difficult, and it recognizes this socio-ecological and sometimes technological focus. And that's why, one of the reasons why the term of ecosystem service has been used not only by ecologists, but from a large amount of disciplines. But ecosystem services need to be really measured with the benefits and the well-being. And this is a paper from Wang and collaborators that I really like, that makes pretty clear that linking ecosystems measures to final ecosystem services is quite a challenge. Because in ecological science, we measure biophysical characteristics of ecosystem and processes and function, whereas in social science, it's about human welfare, but there's this really gap in between, that what is preventing us to give the relevant and measurable information for decision makers that usually needs to take decisions that are trade-offs. So it's like they can have, or we can give the message of the importance of ecosystem services, but what's the service that really is important for you, and that it's something that you can measure and really make decisions about. So this is definitely a big challenge, what is called here as the final service. So in year 2008, we launched a research program that now it's a research and conservation project with the wine industry that was focused on evaluation of ecosystem services, and we made clearly that it was not biodiversity by this, ecosystem services like in general, and delivered by the Chilean Mediterranean ecosystem. Why wine, and why the Mediterranean? Of course, wine is fun, and we like wine, and it happens that in these 5 places in the world, which is where we have Mediterranean climate, is where the wine industry or the wine culture is associated from a long time ago. And these same 5 places are biodiversity hotspots. And they are biodiversity hotspots because they have a high amount of diversity, especially plant diversity. These communities of plants have high endemisms rate. It means that they are only of that place. And they are under a lot of threat because, as you can imagine, we all would like to, live in Mediterranean climate. It's quite nice. And also, most of the agriculture is concentrated in these areas. Now, this endemism is part because the climate imposes a lot of restrictions to the plants that live there, and therefore they have had a lot of adaptations that we can see today that makes them so special and endemic of those places. But in Chile, that I will be talking about here, so you can see, huge portion of the country is a biodiversity hotspot. In Chile, in this same place, there are land drivers that are very strong, and especially forestry, vines, and avocados. Especially forestry is associated with a law that we had in the 74 that really subsidized more than 80% of the forestry industry. And most of the area where you can grow trees was used, and for native forest gone, and you can see a lot of plantations today. But there are these new crops that come and go associated with commercial treaties, and you can see that vines here are important, although they are not as huge as the amount of hectares that we can see in forestry, but it's growing. So, although it's very important, the Mediterranean ecosystem of Chile, do you have any idea? The ones that know, don't say anything. But can you guess the amount of area of the Mediterranean that is under protected areas in Chile system, the national protected area? Tiny, but how tiny? 5%? No way. 5% is like the average of all the 5 regions, the Mediterranean regions in the world, and we are only 1%. And what happens is that this is, imagine Chile from north to south. It's very long. I'll show it immediately. And what you can see is that this is the amount of protected area per region. So this is the end of the world. No? This is ice. And so it's highly skewed, the distribution of protected areas. And well, as we were saying, 1% of the Mediterranean is under any conservation scheme. But interestingly, very interestingly, you can see in the purple the areas where we have located the wineries, and it's almost exactly the place where we are missing a lot of areas. Basically, all of that is private land, and so we thought, well, they are drivers of land change, but they are also strategic collaborators because they are in the place that we need to preserve. So we invited them to work with. And we also thought that they were a really great group because they have forest remnants. This is how the forest, the regional forest, looks like. This is drier than this area, so this is a bit more in the north. You see that way. So we know that vineyards usually have portions of native forest around that they have not developed because there are some difficulties to go up in the hill, and there's some protection now of native forest. But also they are modifying their practices because they export. More than 70% of the wine that is produced in Chile is exported to markets like the US, the UK, Canada, and also a bit to China. It's a very charismatic product associated with the Mediterranean. And they rely on this weird or, subjective concept of terroir, which is very interesting, and I will develop later. But basically, terroir is associated to the uniqueness of the place. So we thought it might be interesting to work with them, because if we talk about endemisms, maybe this endemism would be related to their terroir. So we have been working hard to change, in the first part, the vision that the wineries have about the agroecosystems. And we have done it through the co-production of scientific research, and I can say that this, in the last 2 or 3 years, at the beginning it was not like this. This is part of the lessons. And for that, we are this big group and very, diverse group. Marcela is missing here at this time. She was somewhere else. And that we have been working for a while. This is Montes Wines. And what about this view? This is the view that usually producers have about their land. So this is the productive land where the vineyard is, and this other is the non-productive land. It doesn't say anything about, of course, the value of this. And what we see is this. We look at the land and say, wow, but there's a lot of ecosystem services that are provided by this land. And at the beginning we thought, well, let's go and teach them how to see their land. But we changed rapidly, and I can say that now we have both worked to get like a common vision of what is the land. We cannot pretend to see only this. We need to be worried about their productivity in the vineyards too. Because as one of the interviews of Marce will show eventually, it says, wineries are business at the end of the day. So we said, well, let's do the science that we know, and we took the typical approach that is like, well, I am an ecologist, and I will blame myself because at the beginning I was alone. So it was my decision. I said, well, I'm an ecologist, so I'm gonna make some science, show it to them, give it to them, and then they will change. So we began monitoring birds. And we have a beautiful work that we have finally been able to publish about birds in vineyards and the relationship of the community of birds, depending if there was some forest around and complexity of the landscape. And we found that corridors, biological corridors, so these like stepping stone forest patches that are in between inside the vineyards work. So birds move around it, and that conservation areas are essential, or this non-productive area that I show you, because not all of them were aware at that time that that should be a conservation area. So we did a check, and well, it says, how is this science going to inform them? It was not magic, of course. This is me. So we decided to begin a series of sub-projects to show them that there were some practices that they were useful, and they would have would be effective. But also to show them that it is possible and necessary to try and evaluate the effectiveness of practices. Because many times they make practices and because they are in a book, for example, but not necessarily the practices work there, and therefore the results will discourage them of making those practices. So, for example, we have been doing a lot defining protection areas inside vineyards, doing, establishing these areas, biological corridors, forest patches, evaluating if they harbor some species or not, in collaboration with our partners. We are trying to establish control plans for exotic invasive species with other colleagues that are part of the IEB. We are developing a native cover crop, which is very difficult because they between vines they use cover crops, which is a very important and good practice, but there's non-native species cover crop. Yeah, and usually they use cover crops that are from California, with California poppy, for example, that it's an invasive species in Chile. And this is especially challenging because there is no science and research about how these native species are propagated, how the biology, the ecology of these species. So it's interesting that the wineries are helping us to develop a research that should have been done previously, and with different, with different tools, economic tools that we haven't tried yet, or this is the first time that we're learning how to work with them. And very importantly, a knowledge transfer, or now that I've learned more, thanks to Susan, it's an environmental education program and strategy assessment. So this is where Marcela and Susan and all the committee comes in, and the relationship we have with University of Florida. So we did this best practice guide in 2014. We gave it to the producers. It's interesting. We try to make it as nice and easy as possible, with guidelines, with the scientific foundation of those guidelines, without being, with talking hours about it and not making it boring, unnecessarily boring. We made a notes section after each of the chapters so that they would put really the things of their farm that they wanted to assess, make a map, etc. And we also added some extra information because people wanted to know more about, for example, biological corridors and the effects on rhinocryptids, for example, some bird species. And you go there and you see only if you want to see that. That's like, and that was written by experts. So it describes practices inside the field, like these ones. And I mentioned the scientific, that they are scientific best practices because of the reason that I was telling you before. They don't get access to, we don't have extensionism in Chile. Universities doesn't have people that will make the extension. So there's really a huge gap between scientific knowledge and practitioner everyday work. The invasive species control techniques is like, I call it the virtuous cycle of collaboration, because this is a knowledge research that our colleagues do. We are not working directly in invasive species, but we are transferring and making all the outreach that they had not done at that time with their research. So we collaborate very, very closely, and when we make workshops, they go and present present the data and the research themselves. And there are some practices surrounding the landscape, like defining conservation areas that will exclude cattle, for example. And this is like fighting against imported management practices, because they learn in a university until today that you have to put cattle in the hills where the native vegetation is to avoid fires. And in Chile, fires are not natural. So you won't avoid fire unless someone stops making the fire. You know? And also these animals bring a lot of grasses in their foot into these areas. Therefore, they are not really preventing fire. But you know, the likelihood of someone saying, yeah, I'm gonna forget about that practice and trust you, and hopefully I won't get a fire, it's, you know, a huge there, unless we show them that they won't get any fire, which is difficult. Finally, very recently, we got to work with Wines of Chile. Wines of Chile is the association of mostly all, for sure, all the big wineries, but a lot of the wineries are associated in here. And this is very interesting because at the beginning in 2008, the first thing that I did was to talk to them and offer them all the money that I had for the project and our research. And they told me that they were not interested, that they were not interested in sustainability, not even in climate change. And that was 2008. And in 2010, 2011, they called me and said, well, I think we may think about it, but they were not really eager on working with us as ecologists, because they were working with agronomists. But the wineries that were already partners from 2008 and onwards made them call us. So it was years after that we were invited to do a project with them that ended by, putting up, creating a biodiversity conservation guideline chapter in their sustainability code, which is the national certification of wine. So before that, biodiversity was barely mentioned, but now there is a chapter about biodiversity measured, and they let us make comments to all of their agricultural practices in order to be congruent and not in conflict with the biodiversity guidelines. So this has been a really good step that we have been able to make. But still, as I was saying in the beginning, it's like, well, they work with this terroir concept, and yeah, they may think that it's important, on the other hand, to have water yield, pollination. They don't care much about it because wines are pollinated by wind. So, it's like those ecosystem services might be seen, a bit far away. So that's where we began doing metagenomics, which is quite strange to when you are doing, when you want to get a conservation strategy. And that was because we wanted to describe what was in the soil. And if there was anything in that forest, that in soils, that would be making their wine special. This was very difficult to do. We have a paper on it, and we went, into the first page of the journal and all that, and we did the report. So for each paper, we always give a report to the wineries, but it was not very conclusive. But when we really want to go like from the farm to the bottle, really the final ecosystem service that they would be interested is something related with wine, not the management not the grape. I don't know if you see, so all the management practices were in the farm, and those are related with the grape. But there's something huge that happens after to their final product, which is the wine. And the terroir concept is described as this. This is the official definition of terroir by the International Organization of Wine. And as you can see, it's almost like the definition of an ecosystem. It's like, the interactions between the biological and non-biological environment. It has a bit of, social sciences there about, how these practices are taken, etc. So it's quite rich. So we thought that we were missing the enologist in all of this story. And it happens that the enologists also are very influential on the decisions that the winery takes at the end. Because if they make a good wine, and for example, if they think that it's important, the environment, like the surrounding landscape, they might suggest, or that the owner would put a bit more money, maybe, in the farm. So when I began talking to them, which was like only 2 years ago or a year and a half, they were really eager on making.
I guess I'm wondering what the enology.
Sorry, winemaker. Thanks. Yeah, the winemakers. Do you see their faces? They are tasting wine.
They look happy.
Yes, yeah, they are winemakers. That I invented that word. I think, I don't know if it's it doesn't exist in English.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. A bad spell, but Okay, so but you get it. It's like we were missing the winemakers, which are very enthusiastic. And why is important? Because there is all this research associated that is called the microbial terroir, and because bacteria and fungi, which are related, as I will show you, to winemaking, live in all these different parts of the plant. So we thought, well, if these species are, this group of species are so important for them, well, how the landscape will influence the presence of those species and microorganisms in general, and maybe that's the terroir, that they are talking. And we know that at least plant and animal species have high endemism rates, so are only from there. But what about microorganisms? Maybe there is something. And this is both a theoretical and an applied research question that I'm not going to talk about. But they say that microbials don't have biogeography. Basically, they are everywhere, and then the environment selects. And so this is a theory that is being challenged now. So we will get some collaborations with people that are interested on this very theoretical but eventually applied question too. This is to show that sometimes students say, well, I'm studying only this, but I really think that many things have application, and if we collaborate, we can get better. So for the ones that like wine, you may know that, well, wine is a product of fermentation of yeasts that are grouped in fungi. And then, especially red wines, goes through a second fermentation, the malolactic fermentation, and that is made by bacteria. Interestingly, when these very special wines that are different from year to year and from place to place are wines that in general are made with non-Saccharomyces yeast, basically non-industrial yeast, non-selected yeasts. And they are made with wild yeast. It's called spontaneous fermentation, natural wine, wild yeast. And through the first days of fermentation, here you see the days where, this is inside the wine, alcohol level, here ethanol. So at the beginning, this is like an ecological succession, because at the beginning there are lots of species that then when the ethanol goes up, leaves only Saccharomyces. Not necessarily this, but from this genera, because they're the only ones that can tolerate high amounts of alcohol. And this is interesting also because apparently that is an evolutionary or an adaptative advantage. So all the yeasts that are here are these wild yeasts, and those are the ones that give this complexity and interesting flavor to their wines. So we said, let's find that fungi and bacteria, let's see if they are in the forest, and that might be, the source of this identity. So we went into a field and we did the studies with grapes and leaves and native trees. So basically we took, this is going to be horrible, but for the ones that are interested, basically we took all the microorganisms that were there, we extracted DNA, and we sequenced all the specific markers to see what we have there. Interestingly, as you can see this Venn diagram, there are at least 163 shared species between the forest and the vineyard. And these species, some of them are associated to, they are recognized fermentative yeasts. So you see Saccharomyces cerevisiae here, which is the same species that is domesticated now, but we cannot know necessarily if it's the same species. Could be a variety. And this, it's a native, basically a wild yeast that has been described that works in the fermentation of the wine. And there are other biocontrol or killer yeasts that during the process of fermentation, they eat or kill bacteria that you don't want in the wine, for example. And we find other species that it's not clear the function, but that are associated to characteristics of aroma. I'm talking, these species are, the ones that they are shared with the forest. Of course, we cannot know if they came to the forest, into the vineyard, or in the other direction, but from the point of view of resilience of the system, it's very interesting. And we found similar pattern with bacteria. Of course, much more amount of species. So we were like about to make this link from the farm to the table and the final ecosystem service. And for that, we had to learn how to make wine. And we were very unprofessional at the beginning, but we didn't have, I didn't have a lab. So this is the first experiment we did like 2 years ago. But the good thing is that we made wine, but now we are more professional. And some people came to work into the lab, and especially Toshiko, that she came all the way from Japan, and she's a microbiologist. And that's the Hako thing, that means fermentation in Japanese. And now we have a system where we can really control temperature and all what we need. And also we have the help of the winemakers. Here is Konosura and Emiliana again helping us to taste the wines and tell us characteristics about all of the vineyards that we are working with. Here we are trying 9, these are around 10 farms that they are varying between their management, so conventional or organic, and they also vary in terms of the landscape complexity, so a lot of forest from that to non-forest. So we will be able to understand the interaction, hopefully, between those variables. We made wine. This is just to tell you that we made wine. That means we didn't put anything on it, and after some days we had a wine. So we were very happy because we could add more ecosystem services to our picture. Well, but really is environmental education the thing that we need to make so that we will, push them into really see this, and evaluate this enough to invest in the care of that environment. And this is something that we have been doing for a while. Which is based on, we first give them a talk, so we make a workshop, at least one workshop for each of the wineries that come in. They don't need to pay anything. We go there, all the team is there available for all day. We give like the fundamentals or the basics about why the project is there, the importance of the Mediterranean ecosystems. And the other characteristic is that we make all the company go the same day. We don't want to be talking to the CEOs in one moment and the farm workers in another session. And that is because we have seen that, of course, at the beginning, the CEOs are all sitting in the first row and make a lot of comments about climate change, and they know a lot, and sometimes not a lot. But all the workers are really shy about talking. But when we get into the talks about flora and fauna, basically biodiversity, the native biodiversity of the places, they are the ones that know everything about it. They may name them differently, but they know where they are, how long did they see them, if there is any, for example, cultural story or cultural aspect that is associated with those species. So it's very nice when you see that this, protagonism changes during the sessions. And then we make a lot of, we spend a lot of half of the day outside using the inquiry techniques, inquiry cycle, and making questions that are associated with the practices that we teach them. So the first thing we want them to see is that we are not very sophisticated in terms of that we won't be able to have a dialogue. So this is, like when we measure cobertura, coverage with a quadrant, this is made with, as you can see, and they are measuring the coverage of forest in between their property and the neighbor property. We talk about replicates and differences between replicates. So the other message there is like when you receive a study or something like that, really be aware that with one measurement you can't really conclude anything. other practices, for example, associated or about, like, this is called point of view. So what would you, please draw the landscape that you see when, if you would be a ladybird or you would be a condor, etc. And that helps us to talk about the scale of which you need to make biological corridors, for example. If you're interested on, you know, the bugs, or are you interested on making connectivity better for birds or whatever. This is interesting also. Usually when they need to choose the animal, the boss is the condor, and so if there's a secretary or someone else in the farm, and you can see, you know, how they use the hierarchy on, it's very fun. When we talk about compost, we're talking about compactation, soil compactation. We know it's bad, but well, let's really, you know, make the experiment of understanding how this happens, and also how water infiltrates. And then we talk about, like, putting those things in the farm. Usually most of the farmers have never seen a satellite image of the farm, so they don't want to touch it because it's so beautiful. They want that, but it's very interesting because not all of them know the limits, and it's interesting. So with the help of Marcela, we changed a bit how we were doing the workshops to increase the perceived control in between other things. And this is a way we do this, and basically we ask them to share in groups, different groups, and what would you, you know, if you would have all the money, the resources, which practices would you implement in this farm, and others that which practices can you implement in the farm with the situation that you have, and then we compare. And interestingly, the results are not very different. So we're kind of thinking that maybe it's more like, you know, something that it's like about the attitude or change of mind, that they think that it's very difficult to implement these things, but when they get to the exercise of thinking about it, how much more or less would cost, they see that it's not as bad as they thought. Up to date, we have trained more than that amount of people in different activities, but mostly through the workshops. And it's very beautiful when we have been able to see that they are spreading the word. For example, this is Noelia, the winemaker of Emiliana, with 3 other wineries, Veramonte and Montes, in the Symposium of Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa Valley, which is a very prestigious symposium. And she's talking about biodiversity. She's talking about biodiversity there, and the project of native cover crops, development, the importance of native cover crops. We have, so the wineries are having land set aside, but voluntary. This is a voluntary program because in Chile there is no legislation, law about it. So only recently, 2 months ago, they approved a new law that is called Derecho Real de Conservación, because the idea is to make something similar like conservation easements here, but it's very new, and we don't know really how it's going to be implemented. It's not associated to incentives, so this is the area that they are preserving, and voluntarily. We don't know, you know, in the extent of time, hopefully forever. But interestingly, that will put up, you know, up to 11% of the Mediterranean will be protected. And this is only with the wineries that are working with us. So imagine this as a, you know, a sustainable agriculture project that will extend to others. So people are very nice. So people tend to say, yeah, well, I think I can make it. And this is only a few portion, and it can have a huge impact. So to evaluate how we are doing this, and this is where your colleagues here have been coming in. Marcela Marquez, that has just defended her dissertation today. Have been making really good work with the supervision of Susan. and I'm only going to show very briefly. Basically, important to know that producers that are working with us, so the first bars, are adopting practices, because I mean, usually the programs are not evaluating, especially in Chile. Conservation projects don't really evaluate what's going on with their practices and why. And so this is something very important. And also we know that there are some certain practices that are adopted by the wineries. And these practices, interestingly, are practices that are very associated with the realm of ecology. So I think it shows a bit, for example, management of invasive exotic species is kind of relatively new. That's not a knowledge that it's open, or cattle exclusion, etc. So I think it's very interesting because it shows again like that there is an important gap between those disciplines. And there are other factors that Marcela is evaluating, and she will give her exit seminar next week. So next. So almost.
Yeah.
Someone told me the wrong time, but you should go. This is this morning. But so she will tell you much more about like the social aspects of this. So to finish it, where are we now? We have 18 partner wineries, and depending on how you make those calculations, and from year to year, it can go up to 70% of the exported volume. Okay. So we have those big wineries. We have an important amount of conservation areas set aside voluntarily. We are doing projects finally with Wines of Chile, and it's important because we will extend hopefully what we are teaching or what we are working with our partners to all the wine industry, hopefully. South Africa has made a very good job about that, for example, in a very similar strategy. We have signed only 2 or 3 weeks ago a memorandum of agreement with the Ministry of Agriculture, which is something absolutely with no precedent in Chile, that the Institute of Ecology and Biodiversity is, working together to develop a sustainable agricultural policy. And we have no idea how this is going to, well, we have some idea of how, which are the objectives, but we are working recently on that. And that's something because they were looking at what we were doing, and there was evidence and evaluation of what we did. Only some lessons, because I think I've learned, so we have learned a bunch of things with this project. How to do relevant questions, but for both, because we need to publish. And if we don't publish, we don't get funding for the project. So how do we make, interesting questions that will be publishable, that are new and all that, with all the requirements that as scientists we need, but at the same time that would be useful for our partners. And I think the metagenomics, so the genomics question, the things that I show you related with the yeast and bacteria, is a very nice example, because it's something very theoretical. It's nice for evolutionary ecology too, but also it's very relevant and applied for what they do. That we can definitely decrease this huge gap. It's possible. I mean, there's lots to do, but it's possible. We should never say again, this is impossible. Thinking about how much time how long we would have taken to change strategies, for example, if we would have been working with social scientists from the beginning, or with social science input. I think it's nice that we learn it really by heart, because we suffered it, and now I can say by heart that it's very important. But to be more efficient, we need to learn and make this from the beginning. People are beginning to be aware of biodiversity conservation. This is new also in Chile. And we have a window of opportunity. As you know, there are these sustainable development goals from the UN. Chile just signed it, and in fact, we were able to, something that pushed the signature of the memorandum of agreement with the Ministry of Agriculture was that Chile signed this treaty, let's say international treaty. And challenges, uncertainty associated with scientific data. This I think this is relevant not only for this project, is that we are used to deal with uncertainty as scientists. We use probabilities, and the fact is that they need answers. They don't want to listen and say, no, I think you might be right if you have 20 hectares of this plus whatever this other. We tend to say, no, this is case dependent, it will depend on all these other variables. So we really need to try to have an equilibrium or something in between where we don't lie about the uncertainty, of course, but also they will be able to manage with it. And this is related with the second bullet point there, which is how much science do I have to do until I show them that they need to preserve that? And I think that's very interesting also. There are interesting papers about it. I mean, there are things that are known, but if we wait until we get all the information, all those species are going to be extinct. So, playing in between, I think it's something that we should think about. And my worry, not so worry now that Marcela is almost finished, hopefully she will, that we need to really, in Chile, we need to train students of future generations with other skills that I've seen in students here, not only Marcela, the Southern Corn group, for example. Those skills are not taught in an ecology graduate program. And I think they are essential, not only for conservation, but to create change in general. And we need change in many aspects as humanity. So I think this is very important, and hopefully Marcela will never forget the things that she has learned here, and will be able, to teach others when she gets back to Chile. So thanks a lot for listening to me. Special thanks for TCD that made the possibility of me being here. And I'm very happy to hear your comments and questions, suggestions. And everything. Thank you.